first, what is NAD? NAD is a molecule that you make in your body, and you have to go back to ninth grade biology to remember what NAD basically does. It does a couple of different things, but the primary reason that your body has NAD circulating around inside of the cell is for metabolism. So remember, metabolism is taking fuel and making ATP or energy in your system. So you might remember glycolysis and the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. If you think back, you'll remember that there was a little NAD molecule that showed up along that pathway, and it picked up a hydrogen. And when it did that, it shuttled it over to the little folds inside of your mitochondria. Remember that picture? And it shoved that hydrogen back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and eventually it created ATP. The other thing that it does, which is really interesting, is it's actually a coenzyme or a cofactor for a lot of other enzymes in your body that are responsible for things like DNA repair, antioxidant production, and other really critical processes that are highly related to aging. Over time, as you get older, you actually start to create less and less. It's a pretty tragic story of most of the things in our body that we make naturally. But NAD can also be supplemented. The N in NAD is nicotinamide, and that's going to be derived from vitamin B3, niacin. However, as we start to look at older folks, what we see is that B vitamins alone are probably not enough to keep those NAD levels high. If you start to supplement with some of the precursors to NAD, specifically NR, nicotinamide riboside, NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide, that we can enhance that NAD production even further. So up until recently, you have seen probably NR or NMN supplements on the market. These are products that you take orally, and it increases the levels of NAD in your system. This is where most of the data lives right now. Now I'll tell you about our infusions. So when we give it by IV, it's really fascinating because we're giving a super high dose of NAD, which has been the traditional way that we have delivered it, into the serum. Now there's a new product, NR. This is Niagen Plus. This product will deliver a super high dose of NR into the bloodstream. Now, here's where things get super interesting, so don't go anywhere. What we see is that in order for NAD to get into the cell, you actually need to convert the NAD that's in the serum into either NR or NMN before it can get absorbed. Because remember, NAD is made by you in the cell. There's not a transporter that can take NAD from the serum and directly suck it into that cell and use it. It's intuitive to say if I give a bunch of NAD, my cells are going to know what to do with it. It's not really how it's panning out when we start to look at the kinetics of what's going on with NAD infusions. When you get an NAD infusion, if you've ever tried this before, you'll know that you might get a heavy chest feeling, you might get a headache. During the infusion, you could feel a little nauseous. We call this an adverse experience. It's not an adverse event in the sense that it's anything unsafe. NAD occurs naturally in your body. It's totally fine to be there. But it's in the wrong place, in doses that your body doesn't typically see in the serum. And so what we think is happening, and the evidence is starting to bear this out, is that the NAD is causing your immune system to be like, why is there NAD inside the serum when it should be living in the cell? And so it sends out all of its cytokines and white blood cells in order to figure out if there are cells lysing and releasing NAD in superphysiologic concentrations. So that nauseous feeling that you're getting is actually your immune system trying to go and figure out what's going on with this NAD in your serum. So one thing that I think is super important to myth bust here that I see a lot is that nauseous feeling, that heavy chest feeling is the NAD doing its work. Nope, 100% no, that is not what's going on. We have to extract ourselves from the concept that when you feel like crap, that's the work. That's not true. Now, here I'm going to drop your little bomb, so this is super important. Tune in. listen up. What we notice about the oral supplementation data is NR gets absorbed really well. NMN gets absorbed really well. NAD, if you take it orally, does not. If you're looking for an oral, you're looking for NR, you're looking for NMN. The NAD, don't waste your money. It is not going to get absorbed efficiently or effectively. And remember when I told you just a second ago that in order to get that NAD that you've infused into the cell, you've got to convert it into NR or into NMN. Restore Labs partnered with a company called Niagen Biosciences to do a research study to look at this new molecule that we're infusing called NR. NR is also a B vitamin derivative. It's a niacin derivative, nicotinamide riboside. It also exists in nature in the food that you eat. So in meat products, in avocado, in legumes. So this is really interesting because you have naturally been absorbing NR from food into the bloodstream for your entire life. So unlike the NAD molecule, when we give it in very high concentrations in the blood, where your immune system is, hey, I don't recognize this, it's in the wrong spot. When we infuse with NR, your immune system is, oh, hey, I know that. It's from avocados. It's from the chicken that I ate last night. And your body doesn't get nervous because this is a molecule that it has seen over and over again. And so when we infuse NR, you skip the middleman, and there is an actual transporter for NR directly into the cell. When we infuse NR, what we see is two really important things. Number one, you don't feel that sick feeling, that nauseous feeling, because you're not alerting your immune system. And number two, you can get through that IV much quicker without that uncomfortable feeling. So, summary is NAD infusions are a good way to increase NAD in the cell that declines with aging, but NR seems to be a better way because it efficiently gets into the cell and it doesn't make you feel sick. So super cool. Also really fun to be a supplement researcher and a scientist because we're learning something new about the science of how we can increase these molecules in our body that we know are so important for healthy aging. So really excited that Restore Labs is at the leading edge of this and that we are doing some of the science that the whole world is looking for.